Blip, bloop, start the show. Pixels flash, they glow. Gear up for the quest. Retro games are the best. LDAB Played.
What is up, and welcome to the very first episode of LDAB Played, a little series I'm kicking off where I chat with you about one of the recent games I've had the chance to play from my collection. Because if you're a fan of my Thrifting Throwdown series, you know I currently have an absolutely massive video game collection at my disposal, and sometimes when the stars align, I even manage to find the time to play some of the games in my collection. And recently, like many of you, I had been playing Baldur's Gate 3 and absolutely loving it. Seriously, it is no shock that Baldur's Gate 3 cleaned up at all the different game award shows, winning Game of the Year awards at literally every single show.
And the Game Award goes to Baldur's Gate 3. And the Game Award goes to Baldur's Gate 3. And the Game Award goes to Baldur's Gate 3. Having a pretty good night.
It's just such an awesome game, and if you haven't played it yet, definitely check it out. And you know, as much as I loved Baldur's Gate 3, it got me thinking about Baldur's Gate 1 because, believe it or not, Baldur's Gate 1 was one of the first PC games that little baby LDAB ever played. And in true LDAB fashion, it was actually a secondhand copy of the game that was even missing one of the discs. The great thing is I still have my original copy of Baldur's Gate 1 in the game collection to this day. I mean, how cool looking is this thing? Of course, little baby LDAB needed to play this game as soon as he found it. Now, of course, missing a disc and all, I obviously couldn't get too far into the game back then, but I do remember having a lot of fun, especially with the wide cast of recruitable characters, because it really changed up the gameplay, being able to swap in and out different playable characters into your party. The other great thing is the game had some really quality voice acting. Seriously, the voice acting in this game is so unforgettable. I still think about it to this day.
I am become death, destroyer of worlds.
I am born of a noble race. I pity you for your short lifespan.
Make way, evil. I'm armed to the teeth and packing a hamster.
So here we are 20-something years later, and now I've had the chance to dive back into Baldur's Gate 1 all over again and relive that game from my childhood. So I'm excited to talk about the game with you, give you my thoughts and my reactions to playing this classic RPG for the first time once again. So with that said, now I'm going to give you all my thoughts on Baldur's Gate 1 after playing it again for the first time in probably 20 years. Straight away, jumping in, you start with your character creation, and the game allows you to choose from a variety of classes, with options later to even multi-class your character if you want. These are some great features, really reminiscent of playing a little bit of D&D, and it gives you a lot more flexibility and variety in your gameplay when you get to pick from all these different classes. And of course, after picking your character and your class, you are dropped straight into the introduction and the opening act, before getting the chance to finally explore the world on your own. Considering I'm dropping back in for the first time in 20 years, my impressions today might actually be pretty similar to the ones I had as a kid because, first off, the world is massive and beautifully designed. If you zoom in, individual character models may not be much to look at, but the landscapes and the scenery of the game really are gorgeous. This thing is beautiful to look at. You're seeing stunning waterfalls, beautiful coastlines, dilapidated castles and crypts, all as you're exploring this fairly large open world environment. That is a little bit of a contrast to Baldur's Gate 3, since that game was a little bit more linear in terms of where you could travel. Baldur's Gate is actually very open world and more like a sandbox experience because it encourages you to explore the world as you're playing through. On your journeys, you're meeting other travelers, you're picking up quests, you're finding loot, you're fighting baddies, all kinds of great stuff, and even better, you're recruiting additional companions to your journey as you go. Another fun thing, if you've played Baldur's Gate 3, you're even going to recognize some of the characters in this game because there are direct links from Baldur's Gate 1 to Baldur's Gate 3, which is great if you're a fan of the lore and the story in the game because you are getting to see characters like Jaheira reappear from Baldur's Gate 1 in Baldur's Gate 3.
Countless tales are told of Boo and Minsk. Many of them are so outlandish that even I do not know if they are true. Did he travel with a spawn of the god of murder, who warred against his evil brethren and battled triumphantly at the throne of Baal itself? Of course! It was a splendid adventure.
Another one of the highlights in this game for me would definitely be the accompanying music. We've got such an ambient soundtrack to this game, it really does fit in almost every scenario, whether you're out trekking in the wilderness, in the middle of a big combat scene, or if you're just hanging out at the local inn in your favorite town. There's always some beautiful ambient music playing, and it really does set a nice scene for the game. But the best part about all of this exploration, it is a lot of fun. You genuinely get that experience feeling like you're an adventurer traveling the world. You're trekking through these unfamiliar landscapes, exploring the world around. You're really unsure what you're going to run into, what treasures you might find, what dangers could lurk around any corner. And let me tell you, this game is full of lurking dangers. It's got traps, wizards, dragons, basilisks, all manner of foul creatures are out there just waiting to F up your day, and believe me, F it up they do. Funny enough, one of my main memories from playing as a kid was wandering into a wild basilisk and my entire raiding party subsequently being turned entirely to stone. And just to be clear, there is very little warning that you and your party are about to get stoned in the most unfortunate literal sense, because one moment you're walking along, enjoying the scenery, then bam, an oversized iguana is turning you into a piece of lawn art. And this isn't even an isolated experience, because one of the things you learn quickly about this game is that the encounters and the learning curve can both be pretty brutal. Take the basilisk, for example. Sure, there are NPCs you can talk to who will sell you scrolls to prevent being turned to stone, and there's even NPCs that will warn you about the basilisk ahead of time. But since there's no guarantee in an open world game that you'll even have talked to those NPCs, more often than not, you'll end up walking straight up to the basilisk and getting turned to stone before you realize what even happened. Honestly, it can be a bit jarring, so how do you compensate for this level of unpredictability? Well, if you had the chance to play Baldur's Gate 3, you probably already know the answer, because the solution, of course, is to use copious amounts of save scumming. And if you're not familiar with the term, save scumming is basically saving the game frequently and reloading that save when something goes wrong. Like, for example, when your entire party gets turned to stone for the 5th time. Or when your entire party gets killed by a fireball trap. Or when your entire party gets stun locked by an NPC and dies. Or when... Seriously though, it's not a question of if your companions in your party are going to die, but when with this game. Because even if you're taking your time, meticulously checking for traps, casting your preparation spells, drinking your potions, carefully crafting your battle plans and positions, even if you're doing everything right, the luck of the dice can still roll against you. Because another thing you'll learn about this game is that it loves complicated algorithms and chance occurrences. Seriously, get a look at the combat system in this game. You've got armor class, THAC0, dice rolls, saving rolls. If all that sounds confusing, it's because it is. This game literally uses the combat system from the 2nd edition of Dungeons & Dragons. And that could be an absolutely brutal combat system to play. Looking at comments on Reddit, for example, from people who've played the 2nd edition of D&D, you'll see comments like, most players won't even name their character until they hit 3rd level, which should give you an indication about how deadly the combat system was to players. On top of that, because of the way the combat mechanics work, fights can actually be a little bit of a slog up until you get some better gear and a few levels under your belt, because your characters will be swinging and missing like they were drunk in the batter's box. Seriously, when you first start this game, combat is going to be so tedious simply because your adventurers won't be able to hit the broadside of a barn. And speaking of the combat system in this game, how do you feel about pause-based combat? What's that? You have no idea what pause-based combat is? Well, neither did I until I started playing Baldur's Gate 1. For a quick comparison, Baldur's Gate 3 uses turn-based combat, meaning a character takes a turn, then the next character does, and then the next, and so on, until the battle ends. While turns are happening, you can be deciding your next moves or selecting your next spell. It's simple, it makes sense, and with Baldur's Gate 3, even better, you can switch to live combat for a speedier encounter if you need. Now, let's contrast that to Baldur's Gate 1's pause-based combat, because in Baldur's Gate 1, once combat starts, the game immediately pauses. It's jarring and confusing, and at first you're going to instinctively unpause the game, at which time the enemies are going to walk over and start beating you over the head. Now, as this is happening, you're clicking on the user interface, you're trying to get your companions to attack, and whoops, your healer just died. Time to save scum again. Because you see, with the pause-based combat, you're actually supposed to issue actions to your party while the game is paused, then unpause the game, but only do so long enough for the next round of combat to start. Then you want to pause it again to issue new commands to your party.
Sounds like a lot of work.
Yep.
Honestly, it's one of the weirdest combat systems I've ever played with, and it really takes some getting used to because your play pattern is pause, issue commands, unpause, wait a few seconds, pause, issue new commands, unpause, wait a few seconds, then basically rinse and repeat that for almost every fight in the game. It does get a bit tedious if I'm being honest, especially if you're playing spellcasting characters, so you have to very actively manage all but the easiest of the battles in the game. Now, combine the combat system with the sometimes unpredictable nature of the combat difficulty and the randomness of the behind-the-scenes dice rolls, and you get one of two scenarios for almost every single combat. You're either getting a fight so laughably easy that you steamroll it with absolutely minimal effort, or you get a fight so hard you end up needing to save scum over and over and over again. One of the real disappointments for me in that regard is that the all or nothing combat system really ends up limiting what otherwise would have been a massive arsenal of spells. The game literally has over 70 spells, dozens of scrolls, dozens of potions, and dozens of cool magical items, but in the easy fights, the enemies die too fast for those spells to be worthwhile, and then in the hard fights, the enemies are just too overpowered for most of the spells to be worth wasting your time using. Seriously, there are some cool and quirky spells in this game, but almost all of them are entirely useless. 90% of the time, I find myself just using my highest damage spell, summoning minions, or using healing and buff spells, while the rest all go to waste. It really is a bit unfortunate. Now, don't get me wrong, I didn't totally hate the combat in the game. I did have some encounters that took some careful preparation and positioning, and gave me a real nice sense of accomplishment when I won the fight. But more often than not, you'll get face rolled by some cheap mechanic so many times in a row that you'll eventually decide to cheese the fight by just blasting some fireballs at the enemy from off screen, waiting for them to die. But the questionable and complicated combat aside, there's still so much to enjoy about this game. Like I mentioned before, there's all kinds of companions you can recruit. Whether you want to play a good alignment or an evil alignment, there's going to be NPCs willing and ready to fight alongside you. Even well into the last chapter of the game, you're going to be meeting new companions, and it really adds to this expansive feeling of the world when you just have so many options for customizing your adventuring party. And with all of the different options and the different alignments comes different paths that you can take in the game. Do you want to be the savior of the land, rescuing every pig farmer and damsel you find? Great, do it! You'll be greeted as a hero in Baldur's Gate. Or would you rather go on a rampage, murder hobos, slaughtering every gibberling and NPC in your way? Well, it's entirely up to you and your playstyle. Of course, don't be too upset when the good aligned NPCs turn on your evil ass and try to knife you in the back.
Leaves me.
But at this point, I know you're asking, what about the loot and the treasure? Well, do you like finding trinkets and special shinies out in the wild? Then you are in for a treat because this game brings the loot. Gear and weapon upgrades are plentiful, and you'll be rocking some slick boots of haste in no time. Of course, just make sure you're casting the identify spell on your shiny new loot before you try it on, because there is a surprisingly large amount of cursed loot in this game. Apparently there are lots of bitter mages and wizards out there trying to curse adventurers with scrolls of stupidity, because I must have found half a dozen of them while playing this game. And honestly, that's just kind of par for the course for the game. You get the good with the bad, the yin with the yang, the +2 sword of justice alongside the axe of enfeeblement. You know, in a lot of ways, it really is a game of contrasts and options, which is probably why I found myself coming back to it over and over after such a long time. I wanted to finish my story, I wanted to stop the big bad evil guy, and I wanted to bring peace to the land. Now, I've covered just about everything I wanted to say about this game, but one thing is still sticking in my craw, and it is Durlag's freaking tower. That mother effing dungeon that was so long and so tough that it nearly made me quit the game entirely. I literally stopped playing for months in the middle of this dungeon. That's how bad it was. Straight away, I have to say that the dungeon is entirely optional, so you can skip it with no real impact to the rest of the game, but I do consider myself a little bit of a completionist, and I really wanted to see the whole game. So I trekked up and down that dungeon, triggering all the traps, fighting all the demons, solving the many puzzles, and just slogging my way through with copious amounts of save scumming. Honestly, I even had to resort to looking up some walkthroughs for this dungeon, because if the traps and the monsters weren't enough, all of the quirky puzzles in this dungeon, things that had to be completed in specific order, certain doors you could use and other doors you couldn't use, it really makes it almost impossible to clear without some sort of guide. And that's just another example of the massively shifting difficulty curve in this game, because there is no dungeon nearly as long nor nearly as difficult in the game as Durlag's Tower. So much so that I would argue Durlag's Tower was actually more difficult than any of the final boss fights in the game. So there you have it. LDAB played Baldur's Gate 1, and even with the quirks and the challenges, I really enjoyed this game, and I especially enjoyed the chance to step back in time 20 years and relive it again. And one of the nice things about this game, it does actually have some expansion content that I'm going to be able to check out. So when I'm ready, I'm actually able to import my characters into that expansion content, or import it into Baldur's Gate 2 even and give that a try. But for now, I've saved Baldur's Gate, I've stopped the evil Sarevok, and I've brought peace to the land once again. Not too bad for a ragtag group of adventurers led by a fireball-flinging lucha like me. Thank you for checking out my video. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know if there's a game from my collection you want me to play, because remember, you can see the entire collection at my website, Dabstroyero.com. Of course, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button to join my tag team, and drop me a comment down below letting me know if you've played Baldur's Gate 1 as well. But aside from that, I've got even more content for you to check out, so go watch another video and have a great day.